I mean, I would go to, Rhino or Vinyl Fetish here in Los Angeles, and they would have a lovely sort of zine section, and I mean, in those days it seemed like anything that you would pick up off the shelf, record, zine, anything would be potentially life-changing.
What were some of the zines that you read?
Nomag, Flipside, Slash, Another Room, Search and Destroy, Research.
This is really rare. The first issue of Beyond the Pale. And I don't know, this kind of started. This was a zine that was put out. I have a bunch of object magazines, lots of object magazines.
Well, there was no internet, and I'm sure a lot of the kids nowadays are like, wow, no internet. Yeah, there was no internet, which has a lot of ramifications. There was no PayPal. It wasn't that easy to get orders. You had to print a catalog and send it out, and the only way you knew who to send it out to was through zines.
It was really exciting times, the early 80s, when it was really burgeoning punk scene here. I enjoyed zines. I read a lot of them to keep up on the latest releases and try to know what the trends were.
Well, I came across Op magazine, probably what started it, I suppose. And there were other magazines as well, Fact Sheet 5, that you could actually buy in record stores in Hollywood. And so I subscribed to them. They opened up a huge world of stuff, including things like finding out that there were other subscribers to Op magazine in Ventura, where I was living at the time, that I could go meet those people and do stuff with them. They sort of set up a world where I could then, I realized I could make cassettes and send them to these magazines, and people would say something about them, and then other people would write to me and order them.
There was a lot of fanzines out at the time, and it wasn't always about the quality. We were looking for the information too, how to get connected to people. Reviews were a great thing because you can go through the review sections. These magazines would have pages and pages. Everybody was open to getting a tape of yours in exchange for theirs. And friends were made that way. And fanzines were really responsible for that because there was no other way. It wasn't like we had the internet then where we can just, Google people or go onto Facebook. You had to really search it out. And fanzines were the main tool for being able to find contacts and find kindred spirits.
You give me hard on, you make me bold, you give me honey, so and so. It was part of the communication, and there was a way to get reviewed, and even if it was only in a little little Xerox magazine that only 30 people were going to read, at least you kind of felt like you were just totally masturbating, that there was somebody out there paying attention. So it was a lot of fun. It was a real give and take kind of thing between all the musicians and the zines. It was total give and take, total hand in glove experience. In fact, I once taught one class. Somebody had me as a guest teacher for their communications class, telling them about the cassette movement of the 80s, and the teacher said the main thing she got from me was was the connection with the zines, and I wasn't even I wasn't making a point of that. That just came out in what I was talking about.
I didn't like the actual contraction zine, but magazines, and that always sounds like it should be slick, but so mine was called the Zombies.Trade Journal. Trade journal is more of the way I thought of it, is a trade journal type thing. It's these trade journals, let's just call them that if I may, they were coming out, were specifically about the craft and the art of underground music, hence a trade journal kind of concept. And they were real important. I mean, the reviews, the things you found out about, the contact, and of course everybody was strictly male.
my brother and sister just turned me on to all kinds of things, and they're, you know, of course they're older. And I was listening to Top 40 WABC in New York, and then we didn't have television growing up, so I fooled around. I had an antenna, TV antenna, but yeah, I used it for radio, and I would just try to find any radio station anywhere in the world so I could hear different stations. And I was always into radio and music from just a very young age.
My earliest memory of music is when I was a kid, and I had a radio in my room. I was really young, and I couldn't sleep, so I thought to myself, why don't I see what this radio can do to entertain me? So I went over and turned it on, let it warm up. It was a tube radio with an analog tuner, and started tuning it and listening. And you got all those great analog sounds in between the stations, that kind of like theremin and everything. And then I eventually picked up some music, and it was Ghost Riders in the Sky. And I don't think I'd ever heard the song before, but it was about cowboys, and it was a spooky song about cowboys. And I never thought of having those two genres merge before. And I found that really exciting, and I really liked the music. And I think that might be one of the things that got me into music. I said, wow, this is exciting and interesting, and I think I'm going to try to find more of this and see what it's like.
I'm not a musician, and I don't come from a musical background as much as an interest in music. So at an early age, when I was still in high school, I used to get up very, very late at night and listen to college radio that would cover prog rock and ambience and experimental music, and I would sit there with my sister, and we would have a little pencil, and we would take notes, and then we would go down the next day, or when we could, to the local Tower Records that would have an international section, and we would try to buy albums. And then we would also go to lots of live shows. So I put a lot of time and energy, and I still put a lot of time and energy into taking notes, making lists, and following up with things.
Our babysitter used to play us some sort of rock and roll fight songs and you know, anti-war songs and this kind of thing. And my mother was an opera fanatic and a symphony fanatic, and so we were saturated as kids by symphonic music and opera every weekend. Started playing the clarinet just for my own amusement, and then got a saxophone, started playing the saxophone for the same reason. Met some people, and they said, oh, all right, great, here, you got the saxophone, don't you want to be in our band? And it was the first time in my life that I realized, well, whoa, okay, I could just be in a band. You know, that I had just played for myself in my own room or whatever. And then because of the punk scene in that era of sort of early 80s in San Francisco, I just got immersed into it and became addicted immediately, and was just in band after band. I was like 3 or 4 different bands, and then finally ended up playing and published in magazines and being involved with a lot of interviews, and learned a lot of different things about the music industry and culture that I hadn't known before.
I've just been a fan of music, mostly rock music, since I was 5 or 6 years old in the late 1960s, listening to the radio. And as far as getting more actively involved as a writer, in college I had a radio show. I think you'll find this with many people who got involved with music as far as being in underground bands, but also being writers and running record labels, being producers.
I didn't have any sort of background in the performance of music. It's just that things became available in the late 1970s and early 1980s on a regular and low-cost basis, that made it possible not only to perform, but to capture those performances and also to distribute those performances. So that just happened to be a time when things came together and networks came together internationally and made it all possible, so that people could begin to get their music or their writing or whatever it is that they were doing out there, whether or not they had any sort of particular legitimate, in some cases legitimate, in some cases not, background in actually having
done anything like that?
I have been more interested in kind of performance arts and the general milieu that music would flow through. I learned violin when I was very small, and that didn't last very long. I took piano lessons for almost 20 minutes. Then I knew that it wasn't for me. And then the guitar, though, I kind of stuck with the guitar, and then that changed into the oven rack and various kinds of things you can do with a guitar pickup. I was in a small performance arts ensemble where we did more French surrealist poetry and dressed in bunraku black outfits and carried props and things around and did kind of, I had learned Tai Chi by then and was doing these kinds of poetic motions. I was in Olympia, Washington, and there was this great radio station, and so I was kind of attracted to that. I did poetry shows on the radio station, and then that kind of led to doing sound effects, and suddenly I was the operations manager. This is after things like that happen at Olympia. You kind of wander in, and then suddenly you're in charge.
I can remember, like, it would be the early 80s. So the punk and kind of the industrial stuff was happening, but Soviet France to me was something very organic and very different. And I was like, this whole world, and there was Coil too, but I probably went more for like the Soviet France or Nocturnal Missions. There was this, just to me, a really exciting time.
I got interested in media, started working at the radio station there because Tony was the manager. That's how I met Tony. John was the music director there, and John, I just sort of got, it was sort of osmosis. I mean, just hanging around with those guys, with John, and learning about, wow, all this crazy music. And I had my own, I came from Cincinnati out, you know, I moved out here, and I had some things that, John was into like soul music and stuff like that, and some things like that, and I was into things like Roxy music, and he was curious about, you know, British glam stuff that wasn't very popular in the U.S., and Roxy music was one of those bands, and so we bonded over different stuff that we were turning each other on to.
I grew up as a teenager in rural Pennsylvania, and zines and college radio were the way that you found out about anything, because of course your reality at that point is defined by your school and your parents and your family, and zines and music were your way into finding out that maybe the world out there was a little bit different. Maybe people around you weren't telling you the whole story, and so those kind of have a big impact on you at an early age, and so that's what ended up getting me into music and counterculture and moving eventually to San Francisco in the late 80s.
My second year of college, I got involved with two extracurricular activities, the college radio station and the college newspaper. Music and journalism intertwined pretty much a lot after that.
My musical aspirations were dashed repeatedly by my music teachers, who were not at all encouraging. I wanted to sing blues, and to them that was like, what are you doing, a 10-year-old boy trying to sing blues? I mean, of course that sounds stupid today, but you know, that's what I wanted to do. My very first album was The Crazy World of Arthur Brown. And then I had another album, another cutout album called something like Southern Prison Blues, recorded by these guys in Angola. I just loved that album to death. I wanted to sing like that, and I didn't have any of that experience, but that was just, it grabbed me. And growing up in an all-white town, just something about black music in general really got to me. I was a guy who sold cigars in New York City, who was the brother-in-law of my fake aunt, who was maybe my mother's lover. We don't know, but you know, all these things that you never really know when you're a little kid. I grew up without a father, having a lesbian mother. That's often the case. So she would ship me off to this guy's house in New Rochelle. He was radical and politically, and he's also very interested in African masks and the Black Panthers, and we would listen to WBAI on the radio, which was Pacifica station, and which in the mid-60s they would run entire Stokely Carmichael speeches and things like that. So it was very interesting to me. Plus, he had eclectic taste in music in terms of he collected music from around the world that I would never have been exposed to.
This issue of the magazine is very rare because we had the we went and picked them up at Quinn. I had them in the back of my pickup truck, and then we're going to go distribute them. So I had them in my truck. We went out to go get them, and they were all gone. Someone had taken them all out of the back of my truck. First, I did visual art, and then that grew into the Mutants. And then through that, while I was in the Mutants, we were in Los Angeles, and I saw a magazine there called Stuff Magazine, and that was a free magazine, and what it was people would buy full-page ads for $50, and you could, have a full-page ad, and it was distributed for free. And I saw that magazine and I thought, hey, I'll steal this idea and do it up in Northern California. So I got together with Lucy Childs and we started another room. The concept was sell a full page ad for $50 and we'll distribute it, and it's a good way to advertise. But we also realized that it would be good for artists, that visual artists, that maybe not buy an ad, but buy some space to get their art published. And that's how Another Room grew. And then we had money. We found out that we would have money left over, and then we started. We said, well, let's buy some pages ourselves, and we can put articles in them. And so we started doing articles.
I wanted to make this a giant cat wall. That was my original goal, but it was competing with getting the store open. So I had to stop my dreams of an interactive cat play wall. I was going to build tunnels in it, and I wanted people to bring their cats, but no one's brought their cat in the 4.5 years I've been open. So, in fact, I think it's a good idea no one's brought their cat. I think it'd be a terrible place for a cat. This is Goat Blood. This is a vintage zine store here in San Francisco. Goat Blood is a character from a comic book that I helped publish. We publish a comic book called Lovable Oaf. It's about big hairy dudes and cats in San Francisco, and there's a character in there named Goat Blood. At the time there was nothing else on the web. If you Googled Goat Blood, it would come up, so it seemed like something that we could claim as unique. In the last decade, more than a couple people in my perimeter have been getting rid of zines, large collections of zines, and I would intervene and say, you can't throw those away. You just can't. And their response would be, I can't sell them. Nobody wants to buy these. And so I said, I'll just give you money. So I just started accumulating massive amounts of zines, and then had this idea then that maybe I would create a vintage zine store. It's like one of those crazy middle of the night ideas, kind of like a theme restaurant or other bad business ideas. The vintage zine store. It's open on weekends only. It's word of mouth. We have a really shitty website. We don't do anything online. It's all analog. It's just run. You come in on a Saturday, I close on a Sunday, and cash only. And you just simply have to look for stuff. We don't make it easy for you. You actually have to look for stuff. So in that sense, it's sort of a keeping true to the spirit a bit. We don't put everything in a database. It's not available in a shopping cart. It's not easy. So, but it's probably a lot easier to find a zine here today than it was back when these were available. It's not like you could freely browse hundreds or thousands of zines at a time. You really had to work back then. You get them one at a time. Whereas here, they're all sitting here for you. Just kind of flying by the seat of my pants is more fun than making everything, super marketable. And in this neighborhood in San Francisco and in the Mission, everything has become so annoyingly sanitized. Everything's so clean and orderly, and I just feel a duty to be dirty and disarray. And like an old bookstore, a record store, those things which are rapidly becoming extinct. So I need to keep that tradition alive. We don't care if you buy anything, so if you just want to sit and read all day, we're happy to indulge you. We have certain collection stuff, not even for sale, that's sitting in boxes that will let you go through and just, you want to spend 5 hours on a Saturday reading zines about whatever, you're welcome to.
The closest thing I had ever come to seeing a zine was Eye of Stone's Weekly, which was a little political pamphlet that came out that my mother got, which I thought was pretty cool because it was obviously non-mainstream, and otherwise all I saw was, you know, like Newsweek or something until I went to college. I went to the Evergreen State College here in Olympia. I was working at Chaos at Evergreen, learning about all the different types of music that I didn't know about, realizing that there were specific magazines that covered those, but there was no interdisciplinary magazine that covered all the different independently produced records, cassettes, fanzines, all the community-based radio stations around the country. This was a time when not just colleges, but also a number of small communities were starting their own radio stations. So yeah, I took it all in, and I started writing to everyone, and all the record labels, all the magazines, trying to gather information, because I was just, you know, information sponge, like so many young people are. I was working like hell, constantly putting all this stuff together and compiling it, and in the pre-internet era, putting it out there and doing the networking, which is where the whole idea of the Lost Music Network came about. And then I started doing the program guide for Chaos at the time, and then I said, well, let's do a little music supplement, which I called OP, or we called it OP, but it came out of my interest in Lost Music Network. It was my idea, well, this sounds great, LMNOP. And so it was born, and so for a few issues I would pay to print the music supplement, OP, and I put it into the program guide and send it out to all the record companies. It was very good at getting music back for the station. And then at a certain point I had to separate it off because it was just too much to be part of it couldn't just be a 4-page supplement anymore. It would have to be its own magazine. There was just so much happening.
At one point, and this was pure serendipity, you know, we were in the process of doing the magazine, and we had pretty much were focused at that time mainly on vinyl, you know, singles and 12-inch vinyl. And cassettes started to crop up, and we felt like we wanted to, you know, address that. I mean, there was clearly something was happening. And I mean, it's easy, in hindsight, it's easy to see what that was, but at the time I was like, wow, there's something going on here. So we should do a cassette column, you know, and all that. And at the time I was selling the advertising for the magazine, and I volunteered to write the column, but I came up with a pen name to do it because I didn't want people to, I just didn't want to muddy that up, that I was also calling people up and occasionally asking them if they wanted to buy ads in the magazine. And it wasn't much in the way of criticism we were doing. It was mainly just listings. Just, you know, I mean, I just tried to describe the things for people, and, you know, and give them the ability to contact each other, you know. And so it was, you know, there wasn't really much of a conflict of interest. I just thought it would be confusing, and it would make people feel uncomfortable because I was also selling the ads. One of my very favorite comic artists from long ago is a guy whose real name was Graham Ingalls. He signed his work. He worked for EC, the horror comics in the 50s, and the same publishers that did Mad Magazine later, you know, and that's because the horror comics got sort of run out of town. And he used to sign his work Ghastly, and I just thought it was a good Grant Mingles was just a good choice for doing cassette reviews, and so that's why I called. And people didn't know who that was. We just saw something was happening. You know, it's like, oh, there's like geologic activity over here. We should like watch. You know, so we opened it up and we started doing the listings and asking people to send their cassettes, and we had no idea. That was right at the upslope of what now people look back and go, oh yeah, the DIY era. That was the, you know, and that's really what was going on. People were able to buy those little mixers and stuff, those little Fostex machines and stuff like that, and we're able to make cassettes. The idea that you could decorate the package and fairly cheaply produce small batches of these things, it was perfect. So I think people gravitate towards cassettes because you could do it on a really small scale. I mean, literally, you know, dollars, not tens of dollars, not hundreds of dollars.
We started with an A to Z project for op. We thought, well, it was just a construct, an artificial construct for ourselves to make it so we weren't quite so overwhelmed. So the A issue, we'd have a bunch of A artists and A things, B issue, B things, etc. Probably by C, maybe even before I realized, well, once we've done Z, we will have done an amazing project, and we would be ready to leave that, and we were.
I met the various folks that are involved in Op magazine. So they were set up to do a 26 issue experience, and I met them at Q. It seemed like it went from one or two things to suddenly everybody's doing it. You know, then everybody you know has a cassette they made, and they have a little magazine that they've been working on.
We were hopeful that someone would carry it on. So somewhere around, I don't know, don't even know what issue, the T or the V or something, we had a conference, Lost Music Network conference here in Olympia, where we basically asked people who came to the conference if they wanted to carry it on in some fashion. I said, well, it can't be op because that's been done. You'll have to come up with your own thing, but we'll give you the mailing list and subscriber info and all that, and you can do whatever you want.
Towards the end of my time in college, this was in 1982, I heard about a magazine called Op. They covered all sorts of independently produced music, and they accepted contributions from anybody who was qualified. They didn't pay for those contributions. It wasn't even easy to get free records. So I sent them some reviews, and they actually printed them a few months later, so I became a contributor to Op magazine. That was my first experience in print. Only a couple years or so after I started writing for Op, they discontinued, and they seemed open to other people continuing to do that kind of work. And in 1985, Option magazine started, and I was the managing editor for 6 years of that magazine. The editor and publisher was Scott Becker.
Shoot, here, let's see. Gene Chadbourne, one of the great. Gene Chadbourne, a classic example of someone who's like a genius or a great guitar player that lots of people would like, but relatively few people know him. To Timothy Leary, that was the one where it's sort of getting more. That I don't know. Just had it. Someone had an interview, a friend of mine, with Timothy Leary. So why not? And then actually, this wasn't my photo, but I did do the like. I guess this was primitive computer Photoshop. This was one of the first times I used Photoshop. I photoshopped Timothy Leary's picture, because we just had a picture of it. Oh, that's one of the things I wanted to say. The design of all this. People one time like said, "Oh, well, I really liked your cool punk like style that you used to do," and I was going like, I didn't have. This was just the nature of the technology, and that you were actually using razor blades to cut up things.
Exacto knife.
Exacto knives. It gave it this like razor blade punk look. And I actually, sadly enough, tried to like make these like I don't know, different things. There was a combination of wanting to sell it because these did go on the newspaper rack, on magazine racks. So I wanted something, and then I don't know. But in some sense, I look at each one of these. Each one, they're a little bit different, but they're almost like art. This is sort of mail art. This is mail art disguised as like a magazine, you know. But that one, I have to say, the G.G. Allen. I did a tour, did stuff with Psychic TV, radio station contact addresses. Back then, if you wanted to like find out radio stations, you couldn't just get the addresses. It was radical for us to publish the addresses. Like that wasn't done. Some people didn't like that.
Part of Sound Choice was to give publicity to artists who were doing stuff that just wasn't going to be picked up by the mainstream, you know, more or less, because it wasn't part of the system. And that time, the radio stations, the commercial radio stations, and to some extent the college radio stations, and magazines, they were all like part of this big record industry. They all like fed off each other, and they promoted just certain small, minute amount of bands. And for us who like got us like a look out underneath the tent, you see there's this whole other world of music.
So indie started as a vehicle for contacts to meet other cassette artists or musicians, bands, and then when I moved to Austin, I think it was like 81, 82, and Kurt Krin was a filmmaker. Viennese Actionism. He had done a show in Houston that a friend said, "Oh, you should go see this." And I was blown away. Like, he showed all his action films and structural films. And then he moved to Austin, and I thought, I'll have to do an interview with this guy. And that kind of started Indie Magazine. One contact would lead to another, and that became kind of, and the magazine was a way to document that. Zines were important because that was your only way to find out about stuff or see photos, and most of them always had addresses. So you'd read like a little blurb about an artist, and I was like, oh, this guy's in Czechoslovakia, I should write him. And that was your only tool.
We don't talk enough about content. We talk too much about other stuff.
Well, yeah. I mean, as a matter of fact, there was, pardon me, there was somebody who posted just last night who who had not connected with Underground anything in any way, but was talking just last night about the dearth of like, I mean, what I would interpret it as the dearth of legitimate music journalism, and how it always comes back to a sort of a nasty and not so veiled pursuit of either cleansing the self or whatever it is, but it comes back to the self. And I never thought that it was supposed to be about the self, although it's still going to be subjective, and so to some extent that's a fault. To some extent it's either a false pursuit or a false narrative. It can't be helped. But you don't have to make it completely about yourself at the expense of who you're supposed to be talking about. But when you don't do that, it becomes a very different and a very disciplined pursuit, and it's hard to do it for long periods of time. There have been some writers who have been able to do it. There's some who do it spectacularly, like Lester Bangs. There's some who do it in a very scholarly fashion, such as Simon Frith. And I was not ever about doing reviews, because anybody can do a goddamn review. But to really use it as a way to add something culturally or something long term, or something that has meaning, that takes more work. And you just can't do it in a vacuum.
When the magazine started, this is the mid-1980s, there was such a shortage of media outlets for consistent coverage of this kind of underground music. It's kind of odd when you think back on it. There were at least dozens and maybe hundreds of college and university and public radio stations where you could hear the music. And there were a lot of zines, but there wasn't much in the way of a regularly produced publication that was covering not everything, that was impossible, but a very wide slice of it that was coming out regularly where you could count on having a lot of information every 2 months. And even for people who might have wanted a different focus for the magazine or felt that it was either too underground or too mainstream, there was an appreciation that this is almost like a funnel of core information that people can get from this magazine. And maybe they can get deeper into certain bands and publications through the reviews and the articles, and they can write away to mail order record labels. Back then a lot of it was done by the mail, or get these zines. There was always contact information. They were physical addresses, stale mail addresses. Email was a long way off by that point. But it was a way of getting people connected.
Sound Choice consciously did not allow money and advertising to affect what we covered. It was almost perverse. I mean, yeah, you could definitely buy an ad and then get like a review where someone didn't like your music. Op Magazine they stressed this networking. Other people were at that time too. There was this like meme going out. This is about the time the word meme was even just being invented. But the idea of getting like a network out there, it was the mindset that later technology filled in. Reading OP opened you up to all these other sources, because one of the things they stressed was having a link directly to all the artists who created the magazines and the music. And those were direct links back in the day before the internet. Magazines didn't have direct links. When you read an article in Rolling Stone about a band, it didn't have the address of the lead singer down in the bottom where you could just write to him. We made networking as a necessity in a way to help people find music.
Unsound was a great zine for the time. Unsound had a very broad definition of what was the underground scene at the time. Most other zines had a very narrow definition, and this was especially true with any zine that claimed to be somehow aligned with industrial culture. Using today's terminology, you had a mixture of industrial culture, power electronics, noise, performance art, mail art. You know, you had like a range of aesthetics were actually represented. So it seemed like much more of an open and diverse dialogue than you would have received by any other zine at the time, really.
I was playing in this band, Problemist, and so we were doing various different things, playing shows, doing kind of performance activities of various sorts, and then we were coming in contact with a lot of different musicians that were similar to us at that time period, and then we decided, hey, well, let's start a magazine and start reviewing these musicians that we know or people we've heard of and something that we like, things that we like, and kind of just let's do a magazine. So we had no idea really how to do that. We didn't do it before, and so we looked at some models of other magazines, just got going, you know. I put all our money together and went down to the printer and said, all right, this is what we're going to do, and then did some interviews and then laid out the magazine for days and days on end. But another thing that was kind of a byproduct of publishing that magazine is suddenly we were inundated with so much mail and of every kind of lunatic in the country doing any kind of strange experimental music or poetry or just doing any like weird life things, you know.
Test department, White House in here. I mean, it doesn't get much more fucking industrial than that cover.
Unsound magazine was this reaction to what was a perceived kind of elitist exclusivity that was going on in some parts of the experimental music world. Back then, if you were trying to get the word out about something that was, you know, creativity that was this strange, you kind of had to be on a mission.
Unsound magazine had strong beliefs in visual presentation. You could have the names on the outside that would pull somebody in. And that's where you would have all of your visuals of the bands and what kind of performance work they were doing, or filmmakers or writers.
Issues.
Oh, really? Yeah, it's a great issue.
Yeah, it's a cool issue. The way
Really
that
good.
it
Oh,
really
it has
gels.
the subgenius. The guy that's, you know, remember the subgenius? Oh, yeah. He's kind of like the obey of our time. Right. Carl Howard.
Yeah.
He was one of our biggest eccentric fans, for sure. And he knew both Sharon and I very well, and he was very intelligent. He was quoting the lyrics.
Unsound had the bands that we all were, we felt we were akin to.
It covered something more like gutsy or dangerous or weird or, you know, there are things you'd always want to talk to people about.
You would look at Unsound and like, oh, that's so cool how they do that. Like, I want to copy that.
Unsound magazine was, I think, a leader in the United States of being very much real alternative in that, number one, the musicians themselves were involved. Number two, I think it was more literate than other things out there. And number three, I think it was more interactive than other things out there at a very important time that mattered.
One of my favorite issues was the last issue because there were so many parts to it, including a compilation tape cassette. So each one of these was an edition, the final Unsound, because when we ended our magazine, we didn't want to end by just turning it off. We wanted to end in a large way. There's a large folded tabloid on the inside, as well as a continuation of tape reviews with folded cover that has both images front and back.
Sort of relate to like the Wizard of Oz. I was this person behind this curtain, and people. I tried to make the magazine in a way more representative beyond me, but people would read into things. It's sort of like a mirror. That, you know, just the fact that we had advertisements in it to some people meant that we were like a big corporate magazine, and I sort of tried to make the magazine look more established than it was. It was mostly like me as the hub for all these people. I felt akin to everybody who was doing it, this DIY thing, regardless of what it was they were into. So that's where I guess the DIY was something that maybe was in like our heart there at that time for something, because any person that I saw that was taking the effort and doing this creativity was sort of like akin, and that the star-making machinery, that wasn't what Sound Choice was about. The magazine wasn't to promote like people into stars. It was like, hey, all these people are creative, and that the star-making machinery, that wasn't what Sound Choice was about.
In 1985, I was a big fan of H.P. Lovecraft. Actually, it was my friend Graham Ingalls kind of had a good collection of that stuff. So he had the Cthulhu, and I think that's part of the guy's H.P. Lovecraft's intention. Who knows how it's supposed to be pronounced? It's unpronounceable. So it just became natural. Okay, well, I'm going to call mine Cassette Mythos because it's dark. That was kind of something that was important to me. So the Cassette Mythos, a friend of mine just kind of suggested, why don't you write a book? And so we were kicking around names, and I had just finished working on the Cthulhu Mythos. So I thought, well, it starts with a C. Let's try that. And then this picture that the Crawling with Tarts artist Sue's made that, and that clinched it. So
I've been writing about a very wide spectrum of music for 30 years, and it has very seldom been what's been selling a lot of copies, whether it's been contemporary music or historical music. And especially since I've started doing books over the last 15 years or so, I get a great deal of correspondence saying, I really appreciate your having turned me on to this, or even having written about it in this style where a lot of what I know about this is just a list in a discography or people uncritically raving about it. They really appreciate it on a constant level, even things that I've written quite a while ago. They might have only appeared on the internet. There have been a lot of readers who have gone to the trouble of letting me know that I've helped them find some stuff that's really enriched their lives. And some of it's been very surprising as far as hearing from people years after I did something. And I hear from people at this time I'm doing things, and I also do teaching and a lot of events now. And I get a lot more direct feedback. And people love seeing and hearing rare material, both that they're kind of familiar with, but also that they're unfamiliar with.
I think when I would do indie, there'd be friends that would help out, but it'd be like, get off work, and I used to work like late shift, so I'd get up home like at 1 in the morning, make a pot of coffee, go through all the mail, and then play records, and you just lay it on your floor. And back then, too, I'm trying to remember the process. Like I had, when it first started, it was hand typed. When we finally got a Macintosh, that was just like, oh my God, what a lifesaver, you know. Getting mail for me was the way I started my day. And if I could tell I was addicted to it, because there would be a day here and there where the mailman forgot to come or something, and I always got mail, so I would kind of freak out a bit, like I couldn't start my day. And I look back to that now, because like you have email, and it's like, oh, I don't want to check my email. But mail for me was the lifeblood, and I would, you know, you kind of measured how, you know, if you got a big tub of mail some days, that was awesome. This store has been around. Me and Blake founded Indoveneer, I think it's 9 years ago. The name of the store, Indoveneer, came from Robert Wyatt's first solo record. The experimental thing has always been big, composers, world, kind of having stuff that's outside that you wouldn't find, like if you think a record store, it wouldn't be in your typical record store.
There's a lot of tapes there and records. And then here we've got tapes and tapes. Got the idea, well, why not do the public hearings? And that was the Another Room public hearings. So I wasn't on the radio yet, so I didn't really have a way to get this music out. So I thought, why not just blast it over the speakers here? So I put a PA system on the roof here, and then I asked people to submit tapes. The first one, I think we got, you know, it was like 12 tapes or something. And then I did another one where we got almost 100 tapes. We were broadcasting all day long these industrial music and stuff into the environment. So someone complained, and so the police came. But the metal scrapyard across the street was so loud, making so much noise, that we couldn't talk. We couldn't hear each other. So they had to come in to talk to us, to tell us to stop broadcasting stuff off the PA.
Doing alternative music and media is a political statement. It's not the. This is where I got in trouble. It's not the revolution. You ask people who are actually the survivors of real revolutions, and you know whether what they're doing is comparable, and they will laugh at you in your fucking face. You haven't actually caused any sort of a legitimate revolution that empowered actual people so that they're not under the thumb of government stealing your rights, or stealing your air to breathe, or putting cyanide or mercury in your water. That, you know, that's what a real revolution is.
Isn't it a statement in terms of it being non-consumerist?
Yes, it is a statement in terms of not being non-consumerist, but it's what you do with it. Now, what they're doing right is that they are networking. They're doing it one at a time, and they're networking, and that makes it political, but also semantically the difference between a politic and an impolitic statement. That an impolitic statement is one that is negative, that is or injurious. That's an impolitic statement. the sort that doesn't need to be made. There's a politics statement which moves things forward. Is that political? Yes. But those things are separate. We have to judge them. You know, there's a semantic root, but we have to judge that. Is it actual politics in the level of, like, let's say, you know, conservative politics, or let's say, you know, liberal or beyond that, green politics? No, probably not. And the difference is that on the day-to-day, on the street level, on the empowerment level, will it take anyone out of poverty? No. Will it make it possible for someone in the next couple of years to have greater access to social media, for example, or make it possible for someone else to be liberated artistically? Yes. So there are some differences, and those are important differences. It's not that everyone needs to know that or to be thinking about that in the back of their head. That might actually slow them down. But are there differences? Yes.
Last question. Do you feel appreciated?
Oh yeah. No, I not always on day to day on my job now, but from what I did back then. Yeah, people come through every year or so. Someone will come through and say what an influence we were, or how important what we did back then was, and get the little mentions in the books, get mentioned in people's term papers and stuff. I love that. Just that you know, something that I put together could still have that sort of impact over the years, and it does. It has. There are times when it has a little resurgence, and then it goes out of style again, and they come back again. And I love that.
It's fascinating, isn't
it?
It's like it is. Like in, out kind of thing, yeah. Yeah, I find with Unsound the same thing.
Mm-hmm.